Hello, and thank you for joining me for a quick clicks video on some ways to use Google Forms for monitoring. For this video, I'm going to focus on ways to use Google Forms to get simple responses for a quick look at how each of your students is progressing towards their learning goal or objective. Be on the lookout for a part 2 for this video, where I will talk more about ways to use Google Forms to elicit complex responses from your students. My name is Tyler Montgomery, and I am a TOSA for the Professional Development Department, and I proudly support the Glades region. However, if you have any questions or need guidance, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be happy to help you however I can. I've also added my Bitmoji office, which has a lot of great resources that can help you throughout the year. For this video, we're going to focus on 3 main areas. First, I want to show you how to find and make templates for ease of access for you, the teacher. Then, I want to talk about how you can use the responses from these forms to monitor your students' understanding, no matter where they're learning from. I'm also going to briefly talk about the importance of feedback on forms. I've included the code for my Support Google Classroom here. This is a place where I will be uploading new videos and resources that will hopefully support you as the year progresses, so you are more than welcome to add and join me. Let's start from the very beginning. How do we get to Google Forms? There are 2 ways I like to use to get to Google Forms' main screen. You can either go to your Google Drive and in the upper left corner, click New, followed by scrolling down to the purple Google Forms option. Your other option is to click on the 3x3 array or grid or waffle or whichever you'd like to call it, and then click on the Forms icon. Once you are at the Forms home screen, at the top you will see that you have options to start a new form, and there are some templates that you can use to elicit simple responses from your students. The exit ticket template is a favorite of mine because it's very generic. It gives me the ability to tailor that template to the needs of my students and the types of information that I would like to monitor. There are 2 places I want to focus when looking at a blank template. When you open a new blank form, this is what it will look like. Down at the bottom, you will see you have some controls for this question. The 2 squares closest to my Bitmoji finger will duplicate the question exactly as it is. The trash can will delete the question, and clicking the tab next to required will make it so that students can't submit if the question hasn't been answered. I always make questions required on my forms because I wouldn't be asking the question if I didn't need to know what the students were thinking. This box will give you options on what type of question you want to give. When considering simple responses for quick monitoring, my favorites are the multiple choice, checkbox, and drop down. These types of questions allow me to quickly see if a student understands a specific skill or topic, which gives me the knowledge on how to differentiate for my students. You will also notice a vertical bar of options for your Google form. Going from top to bottom, you can click the plus sign to add a new question. The paper with an arrow will allow you to import questions from other Google Forms that you have in your Drive. The 2 T's of differing sizes will allow you to add another title block with a description, which may not be something you need. The picture is where you can add images to a question, which I will show you shortly. The play button lets you add a video from YouTube or your Drive. And the equal sign allows you to add sections, but this can get very, very tricky. So I do suggest that unless you're very fluent with Google Forms, that you don't try out this skill. Now I want to show you some basics about how Google Forms are set up. In the upper left corner, you will see the Google Forms home screen logo. And the next blocks of text is editable, so you can change it to whatever title you would like. When looking at this form, you have 2 main sections. questions, which shows the question and answer choices that you've created for the form, and responses, which gives you the answers for students who have submitted their forms. If you look in the upper right corner, you will see that some other options are available, such as a paint tray allowing you to change the theme or color of your forms, the eye, which gives you a preview, and the settings cog is going to then allow you to modify some different restrictions within Google Forms. So this is definitely something that is very personal to each teacher, and I highly suggest you take a look at. Here's an example of an exit ticket that I used with my 5th grade students when we were using expeditionary learning, which the school I was at was piloting. After our lesson, each student went into our Google Classroom and filled out an exit ticket. Oftentimes, I would create a template, and when I liked it and it worked well for me, I utilized the make a copy option, and that allowed me to make a copy of that form and make it applicable to what I needed for each day. So as you can see, I inserted an image that was taken from the text we were using, and then I asked my students for the gist or what the article was mostly about. Now that we have talked a little about how to make a simple response in Google Form, I want to talk about how to look at your responses. If you click at the Response tab on your Google Form, this is where you're going to be able to see what your students have answered. Then, if you click the Accepting Responses toggle, you can easily essentially turn an assignment off, which is really helpful when students are struggling to find or fill out different forms if you have a lot of them on your Google Classroom. If you click here, you're going to be able to see your student responses in an Excel spreadsheet. And if you click here, which some people call the snowman, some people call it the 3 dots, you also have some options on things you can do with the responses from the form. You can have a notification sent to your email each time a new response is submitted for a particular form. You can download the responses, you can print them, and you can also delete or clear a form, which is not something I ever utilize and don't suggest, simply because we do always have the option to make a copy and edit as we need. So here's an example of what I would see with an entrance ticket that I used for my students to be sure that they had read the chapter that was required to participate in the class discussion for that day. As you can see here, I have 48 responses, and that number will always reflect the number of responses that have been submitted. Summary is going to give you kind of a snapshot of each question as a general picture. For instance, this is how a multiple choice question would be presented to you. I can also click on the Questions tab. This one is going to allow me to see the answers specifically for a certain question only. And then I can also click on Individual, and that's going to show me the individual form for each student who turned it in. So I can kind of see it as if they were turning in a worksheet. It would be as if they were turning that in, and I could see all of their answers at once instead of question by question. Now, once your students have given you this view of their thinking, you now have a jumping off point to differentiate for your students in a very fluid way. Using the forms to gather responses becomes meaningless if we don't track that information to be sure our students get what they need to be successful on a group level, but also on an individual level. If anyone does want more specifics on how to create Google Sheets for monitoring to meet the needs or anything related to the topic, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, as I am more than happy to walk you through this process in a different venue. I also want you to keep in mind that if you have a system of monitoring for your students, you can use those too. There's nothing wrong with having printed tracking sheets that you as the teacher keep up with. Do what makes you most comfortable while still giving your students the feedback that they need for growth. What I'm about to go into is a little bit more of an intermediate skill. So if you are one of my friends who is just beginning to use Google Forms, I wouldn't worry too much about this information yet. But for those of you who are ready to push yourself or try something new, this is something I wanted to present to you that I was very successful with in my classroom. I use Google Forms all the time, well before the pandemic turned education into what we have today. However, the forms have allowed me not only to limit my paper usage and my time running back and forth to the copier, but it also allowed me to store and review student data to track growth. So here are some examples of some class forms that we had permanently in my Google Classroom that students could fill out at any point. I turned on notifications for this section, so I got an email anytime one was filled out. It was especially important for that missing homework receipt and the Monday morning check-in. That was very big for SEL for me because even if the student had talked to me about why the homework was missing, they were still responsible for filling out that accountability piece and they knew where to find it. So it really helped them understand routines and procedures in that way. Another great tip that I learned early on is if you have a lot of really great task cards that you used to use with your students, but you're struggling on how to get that done in a virtual or distance setting, what I did is I created a Google form that was set up like a task card and had 20 multiple choice questions. And then anytime I had a group of task cards that I wanted my students to go through, I would make a copy of that Google form, set it to the answers I needed for that activity, and there it was. I didn't have to keep rebuilding everything. Short answers you can add for their name, and I do really recommend having the students write their name on each form. The Google Forms are automatically going to take in the student's email address. If you are really good about knowing their email addresses, I not only salute you, I'd love to learn your tricks. But if you have a hard time and you find yourself cross-checking your rosters, you can add a short answer question so that they have a place to input their name. And before we go, I really do just want to impart to you that monitoring is not just the compliance of a student turning something into the Google platform. We really want to make sure we're utilizing these forms to know what our students are thinking and feeling and how they're processing so that we can continue to push their growth and their connections. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me. This was a longer video, but I did want to make sure that I was very thorough with the templates that you can create, where you can find your student data, and using that data for feedback to help student growth. Have an incredible rest of your day, and I'm here if you need anything.